You're old enough now. Figure it out yourself." Those were the last words Evelyn Carter heard before the wagon pulled away and left her standing alone on a dirt trail in the middle of nowhere, 19 years old, carrying nothing but a torn cloth bag and the specific kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing you were never truly wanted. She didn't scream. She didn't beg them to come back. She just stood there watching the dust settle and made herself one quiet promise: nobody would ever get to throw her away again. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel. Follow Evelyn's journey all the way to the end and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1885 burned mean and merciless across the Arizona territory, and Evelyn Carter had learned long ago that mercy was not something the West handed out freely. You earned it, or you did without. She was 19 years old, and she had spent every one of those years doing without. Her father, Thomas Carter, had been a good man, a quiet, steady man who drove supply wagons between settlements and believed in paying his debts and keeping his word. He had raised Evelyn alone after her mother passed from fever, when Evelyn was barely old enough to remember her face. They had been poor in the way that most frontier families were poor, not desperate, not broken, but always careful, always counting, always aware that one bad season could change everything. Then Thomas Carter caught a lung sickness, the winter. Evelyn turned 17, and by spring, he was gone. She hadn't had time to grieve properly. The wagon, the mule, the few possessions they owned, all of it went to cover what her father owed. The landlord came first, then the supply merchant, then a man Evelyn had never even met who produced a piece of paper with her father's signature and walked away with the only winter coat she owned. What was left after the debt collectors finished was a 17-year-old girl with strong hands, a willingness to work and nowhere to go. Her father's cousin, a man named Gerald Pruitt, had agreed to take her in. Gerald and his wife Marion lived outside a small town called Red Rock, where Gerald ran a modest dry goods store, and Marion ran the household with the kind of rigid efficiency that left no room for warmth. They had 2 daughters of their own, Helen and Clara, ages 14 and 12. And when Evelyn arrived at their door with her small bag and her quiet grief, Marion had looked her over with the expression of a woman calculating the cost of a decision she had not fully agreed to. "You'll earn your keep," Marion had said. Not unkindly, but not kindly either. Plainly, the way you'd explain terms to someone applying for a position they had no real standing to refuse. "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn had answered. And she had. For 2 years she had earned her keep and then some. She cooked before dawn and cleaned after dark. She helped in the store when the girls were at school. She mended clothing and hauled water and never once complained, because complaining was a luxury she understood she had not been given the right to. She was useful, deeply, thoroughly useful, and she had allowed herself slowly to believe that usefulness might be enough to earn a permanent place. She had been wrong. The morning it ended came without warning, the way most catastrophes do. Evelyn was in the kitchen when she heard Gerald and Marion arguing in the front room. She had learned in 2 years that the Pruitts' arguments always started low and quiet, like water beginning to boil, and then built gradually toward something she was better off not witnessing directly. She kept her hands busy with breakfast and told herself whatever it was had nothing to do with her. Then she heard her name. She set down the iron skillet. "Can't afford to keep feeding her," Gerald was saying, his voice carrying the particular strain of a man trying to be reasonable about something he fundamentally wasn't comfortable with. "Business has been slow since the railroad came through. The numbers don't work, Marion." "Then what do you suggest?" Marion's voice was flat, practical. Evelyn had long since learned to be more afraid of Marion's practicality than of any raised voice. "She's 19. She's capable. There are families in Tucson who take on domestic help. She could find a position. And who pays for the coach to Tucson?" A pause. "We give her what we can spare, some coins, enough to get her started. We can't be responsible for her forever, Marion. She isn't our child." There it was. The sentence Evelyn had always known was waiting somewhere patient as a creditor. "She isn't our child." She stood very still in the kitchen for a long moment. The bacon in the pan had started to burn. She did not move to fix it. Then she heard Marion's voice again, quieter now, more deliberate. "We'll take her out toward the Tucson Road. Tell her there are opportunities in that direction. Give her what we can manage." "Is that fair to her?" Gerald. Marion's voice carried the specific weight of a woman who had made her decision and was not interested in revisiting it. "Nothing about this situation has been entirely fair, but we have our own girls to think about." Evelyn walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the yard she had swept clean every morning for 2 years. The garden she had planted in the spring. The fence post she had fixed herself last October when Gerald was sick, and it was leaning badly enough that the pig was getting out. She breathed in once, slow and measured. She walked back to the stove, removed the pan from the heat, and finished making breakfast. She did not say a word about what she had heard. They told her at the table after the girls had gone to school. Gerald did the talking while Marion kept her eyes on her coffee cup, her expression something between guilt and resolution. Gerald explained that finances had become difficult, that they had done their best, that Evelyn was a hard worker. He genuinely meant that she could tell, and that she would have no trouble finding employment with another family. He mentioned Tucson. He mentioned opportunities. He laid $3 silver and some coin on the table and pushed it across toward her. Evelyn looked at the money for a long moment. "When?" she asked. "We thought today would make sense," Gerald said. "So you have the full day to get oriented." She looked at him. "Today," she repeated. He had the grace to look ashamed of himself. Marion did not look up from her coffee. "All right," Evelyn said. She rose from the table and went to pack her bag. It didn't take long to pack. She had not accumulated much. A second dress, a hairbrush, the small Bible her father had given her the Christmas before he died, his name written inside the front cover in his careful, unpracticed handwriting. A pair of gloves she had sewn herself from scraps. She carried it all down, set it by the front door, and went back to wash the breakfast dishes. Marion came to the kitchen doorway. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I always do the dishes," Evelyn answered. "Habit." Marion stood in the doorway for a moment longer. "You're a capable girl, Evelyn. You'll do fine." Evelyn kept washing. "Thank you, ma'am." Whatever Marion had been hoping for, absolution perhaps, or at least the absence of visible pain, she did not get it. She retreated to the front room. Evelyn finished the dishes, dried her hands on a cloth, and picked up her bag. Gerald drove the wagon himself, heading southeast on a rutted track that eventually connected to the main Tucson road, or so he said. What he did not say was that the connection was still several miles away, and that between their dry goods store and that road was a stretch of nothing that a woman on foot would take most of the afternoon to cross. He stopped the wagon where the track forked. "Tucson Road's that direction," he said, pointing southeast. "About 4 miles, maybe a little more. There'll be coaches coming through. You'll be able to catch one." He handed her a canteen. She noticed it was only half full. "Goodbye, Evelyn," he said. She stepped down from the wagon. She did not make it easy on him by telling him it was all right. She looked him in the eye and said nothing. Then she turned southeast and started walking. She heard the wagon turn. She heard the horse's hooves on the hardpan moving away. She did not turn to watch. She had promised herself she wouldn't. She walked for an hour before the heat really settled in. The Arizona sun in July was not cruel in a dramatic way. It did not burn with visible flame or crack the earth with obvious malice. It simply pressed down on everything heavy and indifferent, as though it could not be bothered to notice what it was doing to the small figures that moved beneath it. Evelyn had lived in this territory for 2 years and understood the sun's indifference. She kept her pace steady and tried not to think about the fact that the canteen was going faster than she had hoped. She reached the main road after what felt closer to 5 miles than 4. There was nothing there. No town, no building, no coach stop or staging post, just a wider, slightly more traveled dirt track stretching in both directions, and the particular silence of a place that was used to being empty. She stood at the junction and looked both ways. The coins Gerald had given her were in her skirt pocket. She counted them again without taking them out. She had already memorized the exact amount. $3.40. Enough for a few nights' lodging if she was careful. Enough for a week of meals if she ate once a day. Not enough for any kind of beginning. Not really, but the beginning of a beginning. Maybe if she could find work quickly. She sat down on a flat rock at the side of the road and drank a careful swallow from the canteen. She was not going to cry. She had decided that on the wagon ride, and she was holding to it. But she let herself have the full weight of the moment for just a minute. 19 years old. 2 years of service given honestly and completely. And the result was a half-empty canteen, a few coins, and a road that led somewhere she hadn't chosen. She thought about her father. Thomas Carter would not have left anyone like this. He had been a man with almost nothing, and he had still stopped to help a stranger with a broken wagon wheel in the middle of a cold November because it was the right thing to do. He had given Evelyn that not money, not land, not connections, but the deep and bone-certain knowledge of what it felt like to treat another person with basic dignity. She squared her shoulders. She stood up. She started walking. She had gone perhaps another mile when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Not a wagon, a single horse moving at an easy trail pace, not hurrying. She moved to the side of the road without turning around. The way she had learned to do when traveling alone. Give space, take stock, and don't signal fear before there's a reason for it. The horse slowed. "Afternoon, ma'am." The voice was unhurried and plain. Not warm exactly, but not threatening either. The voice of a man who had no particular opinion about her yet. She turned. How was maybe 30 or a few years past, hard to tell in this sun, which aged some men faster and others slower than their years suggested. He wore a dusty hat, trail-worn boots, and a canvas duster that had seen considerable use. He sat his horse with the relaxed, unself-conscious ease of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. His face was weathered and lean, and he was watching her with the kind of calm, direct assessment that was neither rude nor particularly personal, just the way a practical person evaluated a situation. How was not what she would have called handsome exactly. But there was something in his face that struck her immediately as trustworthy, and she didn't quite know what to do with that impression, given that she had been making poor judgments about trustworthy people today. "Afternoon," she said, keeping her voice level. His gaze moved briefly to her bag, to the canteen, to the empty road in both directions. He put the picture together quickly. She could see him doing it without making a production of it. "You're a fair way from anywhere," he said. "I'm aware of that." "Heading to Tucson." "That's the plan." He glanced down the road. "Coach doesn't run this stretch on Tuesdays. You're going to be walking another 8 miles to the relay station before you catch anything." She absorbed this without showing what it cost her. "Thank you for the information." He nodded. Made no move to leave, but made no move to push in on her either. Just sat there on his horse, unhurried as everything else about him. "I can ride you as far as the relay station," he said. "My horse is strong enough for 2 over flat ground." "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am, you don't." He agreed without any sign of being offended by it. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" I thought about it for a moment, as though the question was worth taking seriously. "Because you need help," he said, "and I'm in a position to give it. Doesn't seem like it needs to be more complicated than that." She studied him. "What's your name?" she asked. "Nathaniel," he said. "Nathaniel Brooks." "Evelyn Carter." "Miss Carter." She kept studying him. Her father had always said you could tell a great deal about a person from how they talked about other people. She had not heard this man say anything at all, except what was necessary, and nothing about those words had been unkind. "If you're riding me to the relay station," she said finally, "I want to be clear that I'll work to pay for it. I'll help with whatever you need at wherever you're going before the station. I don't take charity." He looked at her for a moment, as though that specific response was not one he had anticipated. "All right," he said. "Fair enough." He brought the horse close and gave her a hand up. They rode mostly in silence for the first while, which suited Evelyn well enough. She had never been a person who needed noise to fill a space, and she had learned that a quiet man was often a more reliable one than a loud one. It was Nathaniel who spoke first. "You need water," he said, passing back a full canteen from his saddlebag. Yours is nearly gone, I can hear it. She almost argued. Then she took the canteen and drank. Thank you, she said. How long have you been walking? A couple of hours. He didn't press for details on why she was walking alone on a remote road in July with a half-empty canteen and a cloth bag. She was grateful for that. After a while, she asked, Where are you coming from? Mesa Verde direction, he said. Had business out that way, heading back to my place now. What kind of business? Cattle mostly, he said. Some land matters. She nodded. The answer was plain and offered no invitation to follow up, so she didn't. But she noticed without quite meaning to, that his hands on the reins were the hands of a working man, calloused, direct, practical. And she noticed that he wore no rings and kept no visible display of anything that might indicate wealth or status, which in her limited experience was either because he had nothing to display or because he was the kind of man who didn't see the need. She couldn't yet tell which. They reached his property before they reached the relay station. He pulled up at the gate of a ranching operation that looked at first glance considerably larger than the word "my place" had implied. She could see cattle in the far distance, a lot of cattle and several bunkhouses, a main barn that was well built and maintained, and a main house set back from the road that was not extravagant but was solidly constructed in a way that spoke of permanence. This is your place, she said. Most of it, he said. Some of the land runs further east. She looked at him with a slightly different eye. You work cattle, she said. I do, he agreed. How many hands? Depends on the season, 20 or so right now. She filed that away without comment. He helped her down and led the horse toward the barn. I've got some supply records that need to be organized before end of week, he said in the same tone he'd have used to discuss the weather. I usually do it myself, but it takes time I don't have right now. If you want to work for the ride, that would be useful. She looked at him. Supply records. Receipts, inventory, that kind of thing. It's not complicated, just tedious. You literate. I am, she said, and did not manage to keep the smallest edge of irritation out of her voice. He caught it and had the decency to look slightly abashed. Apologies. I didn't mean to assume otherwise. I ask because there are some men I hire who aren't, and I don't want to put someone in an uncomfortable position. The apology was direct and matter-of-fact without being excessive. She found she appreciated that. Supply records, she said again. Yes, I can do that. She spent 2 hours at a rough-hewn desk in the ranch office, working through a pile of invoices, receipts, and inventory lists that were not in fact complicated, but which required careful attention and the ability to follow numbers across multiple pages. Evelyn had always been good with numbers. Her father had taught her, insisting that a person who couldn't track what they owed and what they were owed would eventually end up on the wrong side of both. She organized the records, noted 3 discrepancies she found between the invoices and the inventory counts, and laid everything in order with a brief written summary of what she'd found. Then she waited. Nathaniel came in from outside, smelling of horse and dust and late afternoon heat, and stopped when he saw the organized desk. He sat down, read the summary she had written, looked at the flagged discrepancies, then looked at her. These are right, he said, meaning the discrepancies. I know, she said. The supply merchant has been shorting the grain order by about 10% for 3 months running, he said, half to himself. Consistent enough to be intentional, she agreed. He looked at her again with a more careful attention than he'd offered before. Where did you work before? He asked. A dry goods store in Red Rock. Before that, I helped my father with his accounts. What does your father do? He's dead, she said without particular drama. 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Nathaniel said. The words were quiet, and he appeared to mean them. She said nothing. He closed the supply ledger, leaned back in his chair. The relay station is another 2 miles east, he said. You'll have enough light to make it if you leave in the next 30 minutes. She stood. Or, he said, if you're willing, I could use someone with your eye for numbers for a few more days. The spring muster left the inventory in worse shape than I realized. I can pay you a fair wage, whatever you'd make in a week of domestic work. And there's a room in the main house that my housekeeper uses, but she's gone to visit family for the next 2 weeks. Evelyn stood very still. I told you I don't take charity, she said. I told you this isn't charity, he said. I have work that needs doing. You've already proved you can do it better than I was doing it myself. That's not charity. That's hiring someone competent for the job. She looked at him for a long moment. A week, she said. For fair pay, room and meals. Then I go to Tucson. Agreed, he said without argument. She sat back down. That first evening, the housekeeper's room, which was on the main house's second floor and had a real window with actual curtains, was the nicest place Evelyn had slept in years. She lay in the dark and listened to the quiet sounds of the ranch, a horse shifting in the barn, the low voices of ranch hands at the bunkhouse, the distant call of something in the hills, and felt the strange, specific discomfort of being in a place that was unfamiliar but not hostile. She was used to hostile. Hostile, she knew how to navigate. This was different. She told herself it was temporary. 1 week. Fair pay. Then Tucson. She told herself she was not going to start hoping for anything more than that, because hope was something she had learned to ration carefully, the way you rationed water on a trail where you weren't sure how far the next source was. She told herself she was not going to think about the way Nathaniel Brooks had looked at her work, not with the calculating assessment of an employer reviewing a tool, but with the particular attention of someone encountering an intelligence they had not expected and were genuinely interested in. She told herself all of these things. Then she closed her eyes and slept better than she had in months. The work expanded in the way honest work tends to naturally without being manufactured. By the second day, Evelyn had finished the supply records and identified not just the grain shortage, but also an irregular pattern in the feed invoices that suggested a second issue, different supplier, same method. She wrote it up and left it on the desk. Nathaniel found it in the morning and came to find her in the kitchen, where she was helping the cook prepare the midday meal, because the cook, a round, good-natured man named Pete, had told her she was welcome if she wanted, and she had found herself saying yes. These feed invoices, Nathaniel said. Same pattern, she said. Different merchant, but the shortage is consistent, about 8%. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her with the specific expression of a man recalibrating something. How long do you think it's been going on? He asked. Based on what's here, at least 4 months. You'd need last year's records to know for sure. Last year's records are at the main office in Flagstaff. Then that's where you'd need to look. He was quiet for a moment. You picked all this up from 2 days of paperwork. The pattern isn't hidden, she said. Whoever's doing it isn't being clever about it. They just assumed nobody was looking closely enough to notice. He studied her. Most people wouldn't have looked that closely. Most people weren't taught that letting a number slide is how you end up with nothing, she said. Her voice came out more direct than she intended, edged with a history she hadn't meant to offer him. He caught it. He didn't ask about it. I'd like you to stay through the month, he said. Not the week, the month. The records need a full reconciliation, and I trust your work more than I trust the bookkeeper in town. A month, she said. I'll increase the wage proportionally. She looked at him. All right, she said. She went back to helping Pete with lunch. She did not let herself think about how easily that answer had come. By the end of the first week, Evelyn understood that Brooks Ranch was not what it had appeared to be from the road. The scale of it kept unfolding cattle across 3 different grazing areas, contracts with buyers in 3 different cities, land holdings that kept appearing in the paperwork in ways that suggested the property was considerably larger than what was visible from the main gate. And the more she understood about the operation's scope, the less it matched the man she kept encountering around it. Nathaniel Brooks worked alongside his hands. He was up before dawn and didn't stop until the light failed. He knew every ranch worker by name and something particular about each one. This man's wife had just had a baby. That one was sending money back to family in Texas. The youngest hand was learning to read, and Nathaniel kept books in the tack room for him to practice with. He fixed fences. He helped pull a calf. He ate lunch with Pete in the kitchen without ceremony. How was by any practical measure a rancher? But the contracts on the desk told a different story. The quantities involved, the markets, the scale of the agreements. Evelyn kept recalculating because the numbers kept coming back larger than she expected, and she was very good at numbers. One evening she found a letter in the correspondence pile addressed not to Nathaniel Brooks, but to NB Holdings Territorial Accounts from a bank in Santa Fe, confirming a land purchase that would have taken Gerald Pruitt's dry goods store 3 lifetimes to afford. She put the letter down. She looked at the wall. She picked the letter back up and filed it where it belonged, and she did not say anything to anyone. But she thought about it. That night at supper, the house was quiet. The hands ate at the bunkhouse, and Nathaniel usually ate alone, though he had started to include her without comment, simply setting 2 places. She watched him read a newspaper and drink his coffee and look for all the world like a tired working rancher with nothing on his mind but whether the north pasture fence was going to hold through the dry season. She thought about the letter in Santa Fe. She thought about the grain merchant shorting his orders by 10% and assuming nobody was looking. She thought about what kind of man hid what and why. She didn't ask. Not yet. But the question had taken up residence in her mind, and she had learned enough about herself to know that once a question was in there, it did not tend to leave without an answer. She watched Nathaniel Brooks fold his newspaper and say goodnight, and she filed the question away, carefully, the way she filed everything, waiting for the moment when she understood enough to ask the right thing in the right way. She had learned that patience was one of the most useful tools a person with nothing could carry. She had carried it a long time. She intended to keep carrying it a while longer. The question didn't leave her alone. Evelyn had learned to live with uncomfortable truths, the way you learn to live with a stone in your boot. You either stopped and dealt with it, or you kept walking and let it wear at you. She kept walking for now. She kept filing the paperwork, kept cross-referencing the invoices, kept eating supper across the table from a man who set 2 places without being asked, and read his newspaper, and spoke about cattle and fences, and the reliability of the summer rains. She watched him the way she had learned to watch everything without appearing to. And the more she watched, the more certain she became that Nathaniel Brooks was carrying something he had decided for reasons of his own not to share. The problem was that he was very good at it. Not practiced good the way a liar gets good, smooth and reflexive and slightly too comfortable. I was good at it the way a private man gets good, simply quietly, with no obvious effort, because privacy had become so habitual that the shape of it was barely visible. But Evelyn had grown up reading between the lines of everything. It was a survival skill, and she could see the shape of what he was keeping, even if she couldn't yet see the thing itself. She found the second set of ledgers on a Wednesday morning 10 days into her stay. She wasn't looking for them. She was reorganizing the office shelving. Nathaniel had asked her to create a proper filing system for the correspondence records, which had been kept in a state that could charitably be described as organized chaos. And behind a row of older supply logs, she found a flat wooden box unlocked containing a second set of accounts. Not secret in the sense of being hidden, just separate. She almost put it back without looking, almost. Then she opened it. The numbers inside were not ranch numbers. They were not feed invoices and cattle sales and labor costs. They were land acquisition records, investment ledgers, and bank correspondence from institutions in Santa Fe, Denver, and San Francisco. They listed properties across 4 territories. They referenced contracts with railroad companies, mining operations, and territorial government offices. They were written in Nathaniel's own handwriting. She had learned to recognize it in 2 weeks, precise and slightly cramped. And they told the story of a financial operation so large that it took her 3 full minutes of careful reading just to understand the basic shape of it. She sat down slowly in the desk chair. She read for another 10 minutes. Then she closed the box, replaced it exactly as she had found it, and sat very still for a long time. Nathaniel Brooks was not a rancher who happened to own a large property. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most financially powerful men in the Arizona Territory, possibly in the entire West. The ranch, the cattle, the hands, the fence repairs, Pete's kitchen, the worn boots, all of it was real. She could see that. He genuinely worked this land and knew every inch of it and cared about it in the bone-deep way that couldn't be faked. But it was one corner of something enormous, And he had allowed everyone apparently to see only that corner. She thought about the way he had offered her work. The plain, practical tone. The fair wage. She thought about how he had not once mentioned anything that would have told her what she had just found. She stood up. She went back to reorganizing the shelves and did not say anything. She lasted 2 more days. She was efficient that way. When she decided something needed to be done, she gave herself a reasonable period to be sure she wasn't reacting, and then she did it. Her father had called it her most useful quality. Marion Pruitt had called it stubbornness. Evelyn thought the difference was mostly a matter of who was on the receiving end. She found Nathaniel in the barn on Friday afternoon. He was checking a horse's foreleg, crouching in the hay, running a careful hand along the cannon bone, unhurried as always. He looked up when she came in. "Miss Carter," he said. "Something wrong with the records." "The records are fine," she said. "I need to ask you something." He held her gaze for a moment, then finished with the horse and stood up, dusting his hands on his jeans. "All right," he said. She looked at him directly. "Who are you exactly?" He was quiet. "I found the box ledger," she said. "I wasn't going through your private papers. I was reorganizing the shelf, and it was there, and I looked at it before I thought better of it. I'm telling you that honestly because I think you deserve to know." Still quiet. "So I'm asking you," she said. "Who are you?" He leaned against the stall door. His expression hadn't changed particularly. Still that same measured, unreadable calm, but something had shifted behind it. She could see it, though she couldn't have said exactly what it was. "What do you think you found?" he said. "I think I found the accounts of a man who controls more land and money than most people in this territory will see in 10 lifetimes, she said. "I think you let me believe you were an ordinary rancher, and I think you did that on purpose." He looked at the hay on the floor for a moment. "What's ordinary?" he said, not defensively. It came out more like a genuine question than she expected. "Don't do that," she said quietly. "Don't answer a question with a question. I've been honest with you. I'd like the same." He looked at her. Then he said, "Yes. The operation is larger than what's visible from here. The ranch is real, this land, this work, these people, all of it is real. But it's part of something bigger." "How much bigger?" A pause. "Considerably." She waited. "I have holdings across 4 territories," he said. "Cattle interests, land investments, some railway contracts. The Flagstaff office handles most of the financial management. I'm here because this is where I started and because it's the one place I can still just work." "And nobody here knows," she said. "Pete knows," he said. "And my foreman Davis. The people who've been with me longest. But I don't advertise it." "Why not?" He was quiet for longer this time. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because the minute people know what you have, they stop seeing you. They see the money, the land, the name. And you spend the rest of your time trying to figure out which of the things they say to you are real and which ones they're saying because of what they want from you." His voice had not changed in tone or volume, but something in the plain directness of it told her those words had cost him something to say. She stood in the barn and thought about that. "That's a lonely way to live," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at him for a long moment. "I understand wanting to be seen as a person instead of a position," she said. "But I'll tell you something my father told me because I think it applies. He said you can protect yourself from being used, or you can protect yourself from being known. You don't always get to do both." Nathaniel didn't respond immediately. She could see him turning that over. "Are you going to leave?" he asked. His voice was even, but she had learned enough by now to hear the thing underneath the evenness. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. She turned and walked out of the barn. She didn't leave. She told herself she was staying because she had committed to the month and she didn't break commitments, which was true. She told herself it was also because she needed the full wages before she could reasonably start over in Tucson, which was also true. She did not tell herself the other thing because she wasn't ready to look at it directly yet. What she did was work and work and work some more. She completed the inventory reconciliation. She found 2 more instances of supplier fraud, small enough to be missed individually, significant enough in aggregate, and documented them in detail. She reorganized 3 months of correspondence into a system that any competent person could navigate. She wrote a summary of the supply chain irregularities with specific recommendations for addressing them. She left it on the desk one morning and went to help Pete with breakfast. Nathaniel found her in this kitchen an hour later. "This is thorough," he said, holding the summary. "It's accurate," she said. "Whether you act on it is your business." "I'm going to act on it," he said. "I want to handle it in a way that gives the merchants a chance to explain themselves before I take it to a magistrate. Some of these could be accounting errors. The grain merchants isn't," she said. "That's too consistent." "I know," he said. I'm going to Flagstaff next week to pull last year's records and compare." She nodded and went back to the biscuits. He didn't leave. "I'd like you to come with me," he said. She stopped. "To Flagstaff," she said. "The main office has 18 months of records in worse condition than what you found here," he said. "I'd trust your eye more than the bookkeeper's. And I need someone I know is looking honestly, not someone whose job depends on finding nothing wrong." She turned to face him. "That's not the only reason," she said. He held her gaze. "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. "You're the first person in a long time who found out what I have, and then came to the barn to ask me who I was instead of what I was worth," he said. "I'm not accustomed to that." She didn't say anything. "You don't have to come," he said, returning to the practical before anything else could settle in the air. "The offer stands regardless of what you decide about Flagstaff." "I'll think about it," she said. She turned back to the biscuits. Her hands were steady. She made sure of it. What changed things was not the offer, and it was not the conversation in the barn. What changed things was the afternoon she spent with a woman named Rosa. Rosa was the wife of Hector Mendez, one of the longest-serving hands on the ranch, a quiet, meticulous man who managed the eastern grazing area and whose opinion Nathaniel apparently trusted above most. Rosa had come to the main house to return a pot she had borrowed, and Evelyn had been in the kitchen, and they had ended up talking for 2 hours over coffee in a way that neither of them had quite planned on. Rosa was in her mid-30s, practical and direct, with a warm humor that she aimed mostly at herself. She had lived on the ranch for 7 years since Hector had come to work for Nathaniel and brought his family with him. "What was it like?" Evelyn asked at some point. "When you first came here?" Rosa thought about it. "Uncertain," she said. "We had worked for a man before who was good with promises and short on following through, so I was waiting to see what kind of man we had landed with. And the first winter," Rosa said, "my youngest got sick. Really sick, the kind of sick where you're counting nights." She looked at her coffee cup. "Nathaniel rode to the nearest doctor himself, brought him back in the middle of a night that was cold enough to freeze a man solid if he stopped moving. Nobody asked him to. He didn't tell anyone he'd done it afterward. I only found out because the doctor told me." Evelyn was quiet. "He doesn't talk about the things he does," Rosa said. "He just does them. That's the man." She looked at Evelyn with clear, steady eyes. "You should know that, since you're clearly trying to figure him out." Evelyn felt the heat rise briefly in her face. "I work for him," she said. "I know you do," Rosa said without any particular inflection that might mean more than those words or might mean exactly that. Evelyn drank her coffee. After Rosa left, she sat in the kitchen for a long time and thought about what it meant to judge a person by their actions. Her father had taught her that too. She had just forgotten for a while to apply it. She told Nathaniel she would go to Flagstaff. She told him on a Tuesday evening when he was coming in from the north pasture and she was crossing the yard, and it felt like the most natural moment, which surprised her since she had been rehearsing how to say it. "All right," he said, as though she had mentioned what the weather was doing. "I want it understood that I'm going for the work," she said. "The records, not for any other reason." "Understood," he said. "And I want the same arrangement, fair wage, separate accommodation." "Of course," he said. He nodded. He went inside. She stood in the yard for a moment and breathed. Flagstaff was 3 days' ride. 3 days meant mornings and evenings in the same campsite. Meals over the same fire, conversation that didn't have a desk or a kitchen, or Pete's cheerful commentary to interrupt it. She had known that when she said yes. She had said yes anyway. She was going to need to be very careful with herself. They left Thursday before sunrise. She had packed practically a bedroll, a change of clothes, her Bible, the small notebook she had started using to organize her thoughts about the ranch accounts. Nathaniel had the horses ready, and a pack mule, loaded with supplies that she could tell had been assembled by someone who knew exactly what was needed for 3 days on the trail without excess. They were a mile out before either of them spoke. "You ride well," he said. "My father drove supply wagons," she said. "I learned early." "Miss a lot when he died." It was a direct question asked without ceremony, the way he asked most things. She appreciated that about him, the absence of performance around difficult subjects. "Everything," she said. "For a while." "For a while," he repeated, as though the specificity of that mattered to him. "You learn to carry it differently," she said. "It doesn't get smaller. You just get more used to the weight." He rode beside her without speaking for a moment. "My mother died when I was 12, he said. "My father when I was 19. I understand what you mean about the weight." "What did you do?" she asked. "After." "Worked," he said. "Started with one parcel of land and a small herd my father left. Figured out pretty quickly that I had a reasonable mind for seeing how pieces fit together. What land was worth, where cattle needed to go, which contracts made sense, and which ones were going to cost more than they returned." "And then," she said. "And then it kept growing," he said. "Faster than I expected. By the time I was 25, I had more than I'd planned on. By 30, I had more than I knew what to do with. And now—" He was quiet for a moment. "Now I ride back to the one place that still feels like mine, and I fix fences, and I eat in Pete's kitchen, and I try to remember who I was before I had a name people recognized." She looked at him. "Does it work?" she asked. "Most of the time," he said. "Until recently, it worked most of the time." She understood he was not going to elaborate on that. She did not ask him to. They rode on into the morning. The first evening camp they ate by a fire that Nathaniel built without discussion, while Evelyn organized the food from the pack mule with the same efficiency she brought to everything. They ate simply, and well-dried beef biscuits Pete had sent with them. Dried apples, and the fire burned low between them in the easy, uncomplicated way of people who had learned to share a space without needing to fill it with noise. It was Evelyn who broke the quiet. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "You can ask," he said. "Have you ever—" She thought about how to put it. "Has there ever been anyone you've told the truth to about what you have, about the full picture?" He looked at the fire. "My lawyer knows," he said. "My accountant in Denver. The banker in Santa Fe." "That's not what I'm asking," she said. He knew that. She could see that he knew. "No," he said. "Not a woman, if that's what you mean." "Why not?" "Because every time I came close to telling someone, I watched what they did with partial information and decided I was better off where I was." She thought about that. "What did they do?" she asked. "Changed," he said. "The way they talked to me, the way they looked at me, started being very careful about the things they said, started agreeing with things they would have pushed back on before." He looked up from the fire. "You know what it's like to have someone agree with everything you say?" "No," she said honestly. "It's lonelier than having no one agree with anything," he said. She sat with that for a moment. "I pushed back on you," she said. "Yes," he said. "You did. On day one. I called you out about the literacy question." "You did," he said, and something in his face shifted in a way that might have been the beginning of a smile if it had gone a little further. "I deserved it." "You did," she said. The fire crackled. An owl called somewhere in the dark. "I found out everything," she said quietly. "The ledger, the scale of it, what your name actually means in this territory. And I still argued with you about whether the grain fraud was intentional." He looked at her directly. "You argued because you were right," he said. "I argued because I was right," she agreed. "Not because of anything else." A silence. "I know," he said. She looked at the fire. "That's why you trust me," she said. It was not quite a question. "That's why I trust you," he said. She was not ready to say what she might have said to that, so she said nothing, and banked the fire slightly, and said she was going to sleep. She lay in her bedroll and stared at the dark, and thought about what it meant to be the first person someone had trusted in a long time. It felt like something she needed to be careful not to take lightly. She closed her eyes and listened to the horses and did not sleep for a long while. They reached Flagstaff on the afternoon of the third day. The main office of NB Holdings occupied a solid, unassuming building on the eastern side of town. Not the grandest building on the street, but well-maintained and clearly established. The sign on the door said simply, "Holdings and Land Management Territory Accounts." A man named Aldrich came out to meet them mid-40s with the careful, watchful manner of someone who had spent years managing a wealthy man's affairs and had learned to say as little as possible to as few people as possible. He was professional and precise and clearly surprised to see Nathaniel accompanied by a young woman. He didn't say so. He simply looked at Evelyn with the specific measuring expression of a person trying to determine a category. "This is Miss Carter," Nathaniel said. "She's been doing account reconciliation at the ranch. She's going to review the territorial records." Aldrich looked at Nathaniel. "The full territorial records," he said. "The supply and land acquisition accounts," Nathaniel said. "Everything from the past 18 months. A pause that was just barely long enough to be noticeable. "Of course," Aldrich said. He showed them in. He gave Evelyn a desk in a side room with a stack of ledgers that was considerably taller than she had expected. He smiled at her in a way that was entirely professional and almost entirely impersonal, and then he closed the door. She sat down, pulled the first ledger toward her, and began. She worked for 4 hours before she found the first serious problem. Not a supplier shortfall. Not a rounding error. Something with more weight and more deliberate structure than either of those. A series of land acquisition records. 6 separate properties acquired over 14 months, where the purchase prices recorded in the territorial account matched the contracts on file. But the notarial records which she found in a separate binder that Aldrich had included, without apparently realizing what she would do with them, told a different story. 3 of the 6 properties had been purchased at prices significantly above what was recorded in the ledger. The difference, she did the arithmetic twice, to be certain, totaled an amount that made her set the pen down and press both hands flat on the desk. Someone had been recording lower purchase prices in the company accounts, while the actual contracts showed the full amounts. The difference was going somewhere, and it was not going to Nathaniel Brooks. She sat for a long moment. Then she thought about Aldrich's face when Nathaniel had said she was reviewing the accounts. The pause that was just barely long enough. She opened the next ledger. She kept working. By the time Nathaniel knocked on the door to tell her it was past 6, and she needed to eat something, she had found 4 additional instances across different account categories. She looked up at him. "Close the door," she said. Something in her voice made him do it immediately. She showed him what she had found. She walked him through each instance, the notarial records, the arithmetic, the pattern. He did not speak while she walked him through it. He stood very still and read what she pointed to, and she could see the color of his expression change, not dramatically, not with visible rage or shock, but in the quiet, particular way of a man whose trust has been broken by someone who had a great deal of access to break it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Aldrich," he said. His voice was even. "I don't know that yet for certain," she said. "But he's the only one with consistent access to both sets of records." "How long?" "At least 14 months based on what's here. Possibly longer if the pattern started before the records I have." He sat down in the chair across the desk from her and looked at the notarial records. "I trusted him for 9 years," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "How did you find this?" he said. "Aldrich has been managing these accounts for nearly a decade. 2 different auditors reviewed last year's books." "I looked at the notarial records alongside the ledger," she said. "If you're only checking one against the other, the discrepancy doesn't show. You have to hold both open at the same time." He was quiet. "Nobody thought to do that," he said. "Nobody thought anyone would be doing it to you," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Quiet, direct, without performance. "We need to be careful how we proceed," she said, because practical was safer than what she was actually feeling, which was something too close to anger on his behalf that she had not quite been prepared for. "If Aldrich knows you're looking, he won't know," Nathaniel said. His voice had settled into something calm and flat that she recognized as the sound of a decision made. "We'll say we're done for the day. Come back tomorrow. I'll have my lawyer here by morning." She nodded. He stood. "Evelyn," he said. She looked at him. "I've had men working for me for 15 years who didn't find what you found in 4 hours, he said. "They weren't looking at the right things," she said. "No," he said. "I don't think that's all of it." She didn't answer that. She closed the ledger. They walked out together past Aldrich's desk, and Nathaniel told him they were finished for the day, in the same easy, unhurried voice he used to discuss the weather. And Aldrich said goodnight in his precise professional way, and the door closed behind them. On the street, walking toward the hotel, Nathaniel said nothing. Neither did she. But something had shifted between them. She could feel it in the air, the way you felt a change in weather before the clouds moved, something that had been carefully held at a certain distance for 2 weeks and was now considerably closer. She was not certain whether that was the right direction or a dangerous one. She walked beside him in the evening air of Flagstaff and told herself she would be careful. She had told herself that before. She was going to have to find better ways to mean it. The lawyer arrived before sunrise. His name was Edmund Hale, a compact, sharp-eyed man from Santa Fe who had handled Nathaniel's legal affairs for 6 years, and who, when Nathaniel sent word the night before, had apparently packed his bag and started moving without asking for details. That told Evelyn something about the relationship and about what kind of man Hale understood his client to be. "You didn't move that fast for someone you thought might be overreacting." They met in Nathaniel's hotel room at 5 in the morning. Evelyn, Nathaniel, and Hale with the ledgers and notarial records spread across the table, and 3 cups of coffee going cold because nobody was thinking about coffee. Hale went through the documents quickly. He asked Evelyn 3 precise questions about her methodology, listened to the answers without interrupting, then went back to the records and was silent for a full 10 minutes. "It's embezzlement," he said finally. "Clear and documentable. The notarial records are the key. Those are third-party certified, which means Aldrich can't claim the ledger was a clerical error on your end. The money went somewhere, and the paper trail you've built shows exactly where the gap is." "How much in total?" Nathaniel said. Hale did the arithmetic on a clean sheet of paper. He turned it around to show Nathaniel. Evelyn had already calculated the number. She watched Nathaniel's face when he saw it confirmed. He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened in a way that told her the number, even for a man of his means, was not insignificant. 9 years, Nathaniel said. "The earliest I can trace definitively is 14 months, Hale said. "But based on the pattern, the consistency, the methodology, this didn't start 14 months ago. This is practiced." He'd done it long enough to be comfortable with it. Nobody spoke for a moment. "What do we do?" Evelyn said. Both men looked at her. She held the look evenly. "We're careful," Hale said. "If Aldrich suspects he can move funds or destroy records before we can get a court order. We need to secure the physical documents first. Everything Miss Carter identified, and we need to do it before Aldrich opens that office this morning." Nathaniel looked at the window. The sky outside was beginning to lighten. "How long do we have?" he said. "An hour," Hale said. "Maybe less." Nathaniel stood up. "Then let's move." What followed was the kind of hour that compresses time, where every minute felt both urgent and precise, the way things feel when the margin for error has become very small and everyone present understands it. Hale had a contact with the Territorial Marshal's office, a man who owed him a professional courtesy and who arrived at the Holdings building 20 minutes after they did, still tucking his shirt in, carrying the legal authority to secure documents pending investigation. Evelyn worked alongside Nathaniel, pulling the specific ledgers and notarial binders she had flagged the evening before, organizing them into a coherent sequence that Hale could use to build the legal case. She worked fast, and she worked accurately, and she did not need to be told twice where anything was, because she had spent 4 hours the previous afternoon learning that office well enough to navigate it in the gray pre-dawn light. When Aldrich arrived at 7:10, he found 3 people he had not expected: a territorial marshal and a very specific stack of his own records sitting on the corner of his desk with a legal notice on top. His face, when he saw Evelyn, went through several things in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and then a particular stillness that told her he understood in that first moment exactly what had happened. "Mr. Brooks," he said, his voice remarkably steady for a man whose career had just ended. "Aldrich," Nathaniel said. "I can explain the discrepancies," Aldrich said. "I'm sure you can," Nathaniel said. "You'll have an opportunity to do that in front of a territorial judge." Aldrich looked at Evelyn again, longer this time. "Who is she?" he said. "Someone who looked at the right things in the right order," Nathaniel said. Aldrich's expression shifted into something that was not quite contempt and not quite fear, but carried elements of both. "She's a girl you picked up off a trail somewhere," he said. "Whatever she thinks she found is fully documented and currently in the custody of the territorial marshal." Hale said, his voice carrying the specific pleasant precision of a lawyer who has just won something and intends to be gracious about it only to the extent required. "The notarial records are independently certified, Mr. Aldrich. I'd suggest you stop talking and start thinking about who you'd like to represent you." Aldrich stopped talking. Evelyn looked at the man who had managed Nathaniel's territorial accounts for 9 years and had apparently spent a meaningful portion of that time stealing from him with such measured consistency that 2 independent audits had missed it entirely. She felt no particular satisfaction that surprised her slightly. What she felt was something colder and more fundamental. The same thing she had felt sitting in Gerald Pruitt's kitchen the morning she realized she had been valued only as long as she was useful. The specific bone-level recognition of what it meant to be trusted and to violate that trust for personal gain. She picked up her notebook and walked out of the office. By noon, the immediate legal matter was in motion. Hale was meeting with the territorial marshal's office to formalize the evidence. The holdings accounts had been frozen pending investigation. Aldrich had been escorted to the marshal's office and had said nothing further, which Hale told them was probably the smartest thing the man had done in some time. Nathaniel found Evelyn in the hotel dining room, working through the notes she had made on the second set of accounts, the ones she hadn't had time to fully review the previous evening. He sat down across from her. She looked up. "You should eat," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "You've been up since before 5 and you haven't eaten since yesterday evening," he said in the same matter-of-fact tone he used to discuss fence repairs. She put the pen down. "You're right," she said. "I'll eat." He signaled the server. They ate for a while without talking, which had become their natural mode, comfortable in a way that Evelyn had stopped trying to analyze, because analyzing it led to conclusions she wasn't ready to reach. "Are there more?" he said, nodding at her notes. "Possibly," she said. "The land acquisition accounts are clean through the records I reviewed, but the operating expense accounts from 18 months back have some irregularities I didn't fully trace. I want to go back this afternoon." He looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to," he said. "Hale's office can handle the rest. You've done—" "I want to," she said, simply, without explanation. He held her gaze. "All right," he said. She went back to the office that afternoon and spent 3 more hours with the operating expense records. She found 2 additional instances, smaller than what she had already documented, but following the same pattern. She added them to the record and left a clean summary for Hale. When she came out, Nathaniel was waiting on the street. He had not been in the office. He had apparently just waited. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. They walked back toward the hotel side by side, and neither of them said anything about the fact that it was a comfortable distance apart, but not a large one, and had been that way for 3 days now without either of them having decided it consciously. They were due to start back toward the ranch the next morning. That evening, sitting in the hotel dining room over a supper that was considerably better than dried beef and Pete's traveling biscuits, Nathaniel said something she had not expected. "I want to tell you the full picture," he said. "Not because I owe it to you as an employer. Because I think you've earned the right to understand what you've been working inside of." She set down her fork. "You don't owe me that," she said. "No," he agreed. "I want to." She looked at him. "All right," she said. What he told her over the next hour was considerable. Not just the scale of the operation, she had already worked out the broad outlines of that, but the history of it. How it had started with one parcel his father left him, how he had made 3 very good decisions in his mid-20s about land that turned out to be worth far more than anyone expected when the railroad came through. How the railway contracts had come next, and then the cattle expansion, and then the investment accounts, each step following a logic that he could see clearly and had followed without fully reckoning with where it was taking him. "I never planned to have this much," he said. "I just kept following what made sense to do next. And one day I looked up and realized I had built something so large that I couldn't see the edges of it anymore." "Was that frightening?" she asked. He thought about it. "Lonely," he said. "More than frightening. Frightening I could have worked with. Lonely was harder." She understood that distinction in her bones. "The ranch," he said. "Coming back here working the land, knowing every hand by name, that's not performance. That's the only place I still feel like a person and not a portfolio." "Is that why you didn't tell me?" she said. "When you offered me the work, you could have been honest from the start." "Yes," he said. "I could have." He was quiet for a moment. "I told myself it wasn't relevant to the work I was offering. But that wasn't entirely honest, and I think you know that." She did know that. "I wanted to know," he said, his voice dropping slightly in the way it did when he was saying something that cost him something, "what you thought of me when I was just a rancher with a complicated set of accounts, before you knew the rest." She was quiet. "And," she said, "and you argued with me, pushed back on my assumptions, found fraud that 9 years and 2 auditors missed, and told me that trust couldn't exist without honesty." He held her gaze. "I think that tells me what I needed to know." The dining room had quieted around them. The fire was burning down. She was aware sharply of the distance across the table and the fact that it felt smaller than it had at the beginning of the meal. "Nathaniel," she said. She used his name deliberately. She had not done that before, always defaulting to the slight formal distance of not using it. "I want you to understand something." "All right," he said. "I'm not going to tell you that none of this matters," she said. "The money, the land, what your name means in this territory. It matters in practical terms, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise because I've learned that pretending things don't exist is a good way to get blindsided by them." He nodded. "But," she said, "none of it changes what I've seen in 3 weeks on your ranch. The way Rosa talks about the night you rode for the doctor. The way your youngest hand keeps a book in the tack room because you put it there. The way Pete makes 2 plates every evening without being asked." She paused. "Those things happened before I knew anything, and they're the things that matter to me." He was very still. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because you told me the truth tonight," she said. "And I thought you deserved to hear the truth back." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind that held something without forcing it. "I should go," she said, and stood. He stood when she did the way he always did. A habit so natural she had stopped noticing it and then started noticing it again. "Evelyn," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." She nodded. She walked to the stairs. She did not look back because she knew if she did, she would see something in his face that she wasn't ready to carry up to the room with her, not tonight, when everything was still too much in motion. She went to bed and slept the hard, deep sleep of someone who had done everything right and was still terrified of what came next. The ride back took 3 days, same as the ride out. But it felt different in the way that return journeys often do, the same distance covered in a different direction, with a different weight of things known. On the second evening, camped beside a dry creek bed with the fire between them and the horses resting nearby, Nathaniel said, "There's something else I haven't told you." She looked up from her coffee. "There are men coming to the ranch," he said. "I found out before we left Flagstaff. I've been deciding how to tell you." She felt the shift in the air before he said the next part. something in the particular flatness of his voice. "What kind of men?" she said. "Investors," he said. "From back east. A group called the Continental Land Syndicate. They've been buying up territorial holdings for 2 years. Consolidating. They approached me 6 months ago about selling the ranch and the surrounding grazing land." "You told them no," she said. It was not a question. "I told them no," he confirmed. "Politely, in writing, through Hale." "And they're coming anyway," she said. "They're sending a representative," he said. "A man named Caldwell. He'll be at the ranch when we get back." She held her coffee cup in both hands and thought about that. "What do they want?" she said. "If you've already said no." "To change my mind," he said. "Or to find a reason I don't have a choice." She looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" Howe was quiet for a moment. "It means they've done this before. They don't just buy properties, Evelyn. They acquire them. Sometimes through purchase, sometimes through leveraging existing problems, legal disputes, financial pressure, debt." He paused. "With Aldrich's situation now becoming public record, there's a version of this where they use the embezzlement as leverage. Argue that my territorial accounts are compromised, that the management of my holdings is in question." She set down her coffee. "They'd use a crime that was committed against you as a reason you can't be trusted to manage your own property," she said. "It's a legal argument," he said. "Not a good one in my view. But Caldwell is not the kind of man who makes arguments because they're good. He makes them because they create pressure." "What kind of pressure?" "Enough to make a man sell at below value just to make it stop," he said. She looked at the fire. "Who knows about this?" she said. "The ranch hands the community. The people who depend on the ranch don't know yet," he said. "I didn't want to worry them before I understood what Caldwell was actually bringing." She was quiet for a long time. "Nathaniel," she said. "The people who work that ranch, Hector and Rosa Pete, the hands, they've built their lives on that land. If a syndicate buys it and consolidates it into a larger operation, most of them lose their positions." "I know," he said. "So this isn't just about you," she said. "No," he said. "It never was." She looked at him. "Then we need to understand exactly what Caldwell is bringing before he gets there," she said. "Do you know what legal grounds they're planning to use?" "Hale thinks they'll argue mismanagement of territorial accounts," he said, "using the embezzlement case." "That's backwards," she said immediately. "You didn't mismanage the accounts. Someone stole from you. That's a distinction a territorial court would need to recognize." "Yes," he said. "But creating confusion between those two things is enough to delay, to create uncertainty, to make other investors nervous about doing business with me. You don't have to win the legal argument. You just have to make it expensive enough that the other side considers selling preferable." She understood that. She had seen Gerald Pruitt do something similar on a much smaller scale, not outright dishonest, just strategic about what facts he emphasized and which ones he let slide into the background. "How long until Caldwell arrives at the ranch?" she said. "He'll be there when we get back," he said. "Day after tomorrow." She nodded. She picked up her coffee, drank it. "Let the fire do what fires do in the quiet and the dark. Then we have 2 days to think," she said. "And I've found that 2 days of thinking is usually enough if you use them right." He looked at her with the particular expression she had come to recognize, the one that was not quite a smile, but contained the same warmth. "You're not going to tell me not to worry about it," he said. "No," she said. "Worry is useful when it makes you prepare. It's only a problem when it makes you freeze." "Where did you learn that?" he said. "My father," she said. "He said it every time the wagon needed a repair he didn't have money for yet." She stared at the fire. "He was right almost every time," she said. "You think clearly, you find what you need, and then you fix the wheel." The fire crackled. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "Evelyn." She looked at him. "I'm glad you were on that road," he said. She held his gaze for exactly as long as was safe. "Get some sleep." "Sleep," she said. "We need to cover ground tomorrow." She pulled her bedroll close and turned away from the fire, and she lay still and listened to the sounds of the night and the steady breathing of a man she trusted more than she had trusted anyone since her father. and she thought about what was waiting for them at the ranch, and she thought about what that trust was growing into, whether she had decided to let it or not. She thought about Caldwell. She thought about those people at the ranch who had no idea what was coming for the lives they had built there. She thought about a girl left on a dusty road 2 months ago with $3.40 and a half-empty canteen. That girl had not known then what she was capable of. She was beginning to know now. She let that thought settle in her chest like something solid. And then she closed her eyes and let the night do its work. Caldwell was already at the ranch when they rode in. Evelyn knew him before Nathaniel said a word, not because she had seen him before, but because she had learned to read a certain kind of man at a glance. The kind who arrived somewhere uninvited and made it feel like you were the one who had shown up late. He was standing in the yard outside the main house with the specific ease of a man who had already decided the property was his and was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. He was well dressed for the territory, not extravagant, but deliberate. Every detail of his appearance communicated the same thing. I come from somewhere with more resources than this, and I want you to feel that every moment we're speaking. He turned when he heard the horses. "Mr. Brooks," he said, walking forward with his hand out and a smile that reached exactly as far as it needed to, and no further. "I apologize for arriving ahead of schedule. I hope it hasn't caused any inconvenience." Nathaniel dismounted and shook the hand briefly. "Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell's eyes moved to Evelyn, a quick, efficient assessment, the kind that categorized and filed without appearing to look too long. She saw him decide she was not relevant. She noted that he had decided it and kept her expression neutral. "I'd like to discuss the proposal at your convenience," Caldwell said. "I understand you've been traveling. We can wait until morning if you prefer." "We'll talk tonight," Nathaniel said. "Give us an hour." Caldwell nodded pleasantly. He went back inside. Nathaniel handed the reins to one of the hands and walked to the barn. Evelyn followed. Inside with the door closed, Nathaniel said, "Tell me what you saw." "He's already comfortable here," she said. "He wasn't waiting, he was occupying." "That's his method," Nathaniel said. "He arrives early, makes himself familiar with the property, talks to whoever will talk to him. By the time you sit down to negotiate, he knows more about your operation than you realized he could learn in an afternoon." "Has he talked to the hands?" "Almost certainly." She thought about that. Who would talk to him? Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Most of them would be polite. Hector wouldn't say anything beyond the weather. Pete would feed him and tell him nothing. He paused. "But there are two younger hands who've only been here a season. They don't know the full picture." "Then he's already gotten something," she said. "Probably," Nathaniel said. He leaned against the stall. "Hale is coming up from Flagstaff tomorrow with the formal legal response to the mismanagement claim. That buys us time in court. But Caldwell isn't here to go to court, Evelyn. He's here to make me not want to." She understood the distinction perfectly. Court was the last resort. Pressure was the first. "What does he have?" she said. "The embezzlement case is public record now," Nathaniel said. "He'll use it to argue that the territorial accounts were mismanaged. That's false, but confusion between mismanaged and stolen from is enough to create doubt with outside investors, with the banks, with anyone who does business with me on a handshake basis. And if outside investors get nervous, the cattle contracts come up for renewal in 30 days, he said. If 2 or 3 major buyers decide to wait and see the operating revenue for the next quarter drops enough to create a genuine financial strain. Not catastrophic, but enough that a below-market offer from the syndicate starts looking more reasonable than it should." She was quiet. "He's very good at this," she said. "He's done it 4 times in the past 2 years, Nathaniel said. 4 ranches, 3 of them sold. What happened to the 4th? Nathaniel's expression was enough of an answer. She straightened. "All right," she said. "Then we need to know exactly what he's planning to say tonight, so we can decide what to say back." "We," Nathaniel said. "Unless you'd prefer to go alone," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "I'd like you in the room," he said. "If you're willing." "I'm willing," she said. They sat across from Caldwell in Nathaniel's front room, A table, 3 chairs, a lamp burning between them, and the kind of quiet that settles over a space when everybody in it knows that what gets said in the next hour matters. Caldwell opened with pleasantries that lasted exactly as long as required, then set a folder on the table. "The syndicate's position is straightforward," he said. "We believe Brooks Ranch and the surrounding territorial holdings represent an exceptional opportunity for consolidation. We're prepared to offer a purchase price that reflects that belief. I think you'll find the number generous." He slid a paper across the table. Nathaniel looked at it without picking it up. Evelyn looked at it from where she sat. The number was not generous. It was approximately 60% of what she had calculated the operation to be worth, based on 3 weeks inside its accounts. "That's your opening offer," Nathaniel said. "That's our offer," Caldwell said. "We're not anticipating a negotiation, Mr. Brooks. We're anticipating a conversation about the realities of your current situation." There it was. "What realities?" Nathaniel said. Caldwell folded his hands on the table. Calm, practiced, precise. "The territorial accounts for NB Holdings are currently under investigation following a significant embezzlement case," he said. "The scale of the misappropriation raises serious questions about the management oversight of your operations. I understand the situation is being characterized as a crime committed against you, and I don't doubt that characterization is sincere. But perception, Mr. Brooks operates independently of intention." "Meaning," Nathaniel said. "Meaning that your major cattle contract buyers, I've spoken with 3 of their representatives in the past month, are nervous. They're not pulling contracts yet, but they're watching. And if the investigation continues to generate public attention, watching becomes reconsidering." He paused. "We're offering you a way to step back from that exposure. A clean sale, a fair price, and no further uncertainty." The room was quiet. Evelyn looked at Caldwell's hands on the table. He was not tense. He had done this enough times that he didn't get tense. He had already written the outcome in his head and was simply waiting for reality to catch up. She looked at Nathaniel. His face was even. She had learned to read beneath the evenness. He was angry, the clean, cold kind of angry that came from a man who understood exactly what was being done to him and was deciding how to respond to it. "Mr. Caldwell," Evelyn said. Both men looked at her. Caldwell's expression shifted slightly, the briefest recalibration reassigning her from irrelevant to worth assessing. "Miss," he said. "Carter," she said. "I've been managing the accounts reconciliation for Mr. Brooks's territorial holdings." "I see," Caldwell said in a tone that communicated he did not entirely see, but was willing to proceed. "The embezzlement case," she said. "You've characterized it as raising questions about management oversight. I'd like to ask you a specific question about that characterization." Caldwell's expression remained pleasant. "Of course." "If a bank is robbed," she said, "do you consider that evidence that the bank is poorly managed?" A pause. "The analogy isn't quite," he began. "The notarial records confirm that the purchase prices recorded in the territorial ledgers were altered by the account manager," she said. "Not by Mr. Brooks, not by his direction, by a man who had access to the records and used that access to redirect funds. That is a crime committed against the operation, Mr. Caldwell, not by it. Any territorial court would recognize that distinction. Any legitimate investor who looks at the actual documentation would recognize it." Caldwell looked at her with the particular attention of someone who had underestimated something and was now correcting that error. "You're the one who found the discrepancy," he said. "I documented it," she said. "The discrepancy existed before I arrived." "And you were hired when exactly?" "Approximately 3 weeks ago," she said. "Hired from where?" "That's not relevant to the question I asked," she said. "Which you haven't answered." The room was very still. Caldwell smiled, smaller this time, and more real than the one he'd walked in with. "You're right," he said. "The bank analogy is fair, in a court of law." He leaned forward slightly. "But I'm not asking Mr. Brooks to make a decision in a court of law. I'm asking him to consider what the next 6 months of public investigation will do to relationships that exist outside of courts, to handshake agreements, to the kind of trust that takes years to build and considerably less time to damage." It was, Evelyn acknowledged internally, a good answer. He was not wrong that reputation operated differently than law. He knew exactly where the pressure point was, and he was pressing it without applying enough force to be called threatening. She looked at Nathaniel. He was watching her. She gave the smallest nod. He looked back at Caldwell. "I'll review the offer," Nathaniel said. "I'll have a response for you by tomorrow morning." Caldwell nodded, stood, extended his hand again. "I appreciate the time, Mr. Brooks. I hope we can come to an agreement that works for everyone." He left the room. The door closed. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "He's going to come back with more pressure tomorrow," she said. "I know," Nathaniel said. "The contract buyers, the three he mentioned. Do you know which ones?" "I have a reasonable idea," he said. "Can you reach them before he does again?" Nathaniel looked at her. "Explain what you're thinking." "He said they're nervous, not withdrawn," she said. "Nervous means they haven't decided yet. If you contact them directly, not through an intermediary directly, and show them the documentation. The notarial records, the clear distinction between mismanagement and theft. Hale's legal summary. They're businessmen. They understand the difference between a man who was robbed and a man who was reckless." Nathaniel was quiet. "You think that's the pivot," he said. "I think if he loses the buyer pressure angle, the rest of his argument is a legal case that Hale can handle," she said. "He's not trying to beat you in court. He's trying to make you not want to fight. Take away the thing that makes you not want to fight." Nathaniel stood, walked to the window. "There's a telegraph office in town," he said. "How early does it open?" 6, he said. "Then we have tonight to draft what you're going to send," she said. He turned from the window and looked at her with the full weight of his attention. "Evelyn," he said, "when all of this is over, draft first," she said firmly. "Everything else after." His mouth curved slightly. "You're not going to let me say it," he said. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight we work." He sat back down. "All right," he said. "Tonight we work." They drafted until past midnight. Pete appeared at 10 with coffee and a plate of food and the specific discretion of a man who understood that something important was happening, and that the best contribution he could make was the coffee. He set it down without a word and left. Evelyn found herself deeply grateful for him in a way that she knew would take a long time to adequately express. The telegrams to the 3 contract buyers were precise, not emotional, not defensive, but factual, with the specific clarity that Evelyn had learned was more persuasive than any appeal to sympathy. They laid out the documentation available, referenced Hale's legal assessment, and offered a direct meeting with full access to the verified records. She also drafted something she had been turning over in her mind since the ride back from Flagstaff. "There's another piece," she said. Nathaniel looked up. "Caldwell has done this 4 times, she said. "You said 3 ranches sold. 1 didn't, but something happened to it. What?" Nathaniel set down his pen. "The Harlan family east of Prescott. They refused to sell. Caldwell's people filed a territorial mismanagement claim in court and tied it up in proceedings for 8 months. By the time the court dismissed it, the family had burned through their operating reserves paying legal fees." Evelyn looked at the table. "So the legal case is designed to drain, not to win," she said. "That's my read," he said. "Then we need to find the other families," she said. He went still. "What?" "The 3 who sold," she said. "And the Harlans. If Caldwell used the same legal methodology, the same mismanagement characterization on 4 separate properties. There's a pattern. A territorial court might dismiss 1 case as a legitimate dispute, but 4 cases with the same structure, the same legal language, the same outcome." She looked at Nathaniel. "That's not legal argument. That's a scheme. And a scheme is something a territorial court takes considerably more seriously." Nathaniel stared at her. "You want to build a case against the syndicate itself," he said. "I want to show a territorial judge that what's being done to you has been done before, deliberately by the same organization, using the same methods," she said. "That changes the conversation from a land dispute to a pattern of predatory acquisition fraud." The silence in the room had a different quality now. "Can we get the documentation from the other families in time?" he said. Hale would know how to approach them, she said. If the Harlans are still angry, and I imagine they are, they might welcome the chance to be part of something that goes after the organization that cost them 8 months of their lives. She paused. People who've been wronged the same way you've been wronged tend to want to see it named for what it is. Nathaniel was very still for a long moment. You understand what this means, he said. If we go after the syndicate at that level, they'll push back harder. It won't just be Caldwell with a purchase offer. It'll be lawyers and legal delays and months of uncertainty. I know, she said. For everyone on this ranch, he said. Hector and Rosa, Pete, the hands. If I fight this at that level, they live with the uncertainty too. They're already living with it, she said. They just don't know it yet. Caldwell didn't come here to negotiate, Nathaniel. He came here to collect. The question isn't whether you fight, it's whether you fight now on your terms, or 6 months from now when he's had time to apply more pressure. He looked at her. And if we lose, he said. If the court doesn't see the pattern, if the buyers pull back anyway. She held his gaze. Then you lose having fought honestly for something worth fighting for, she said. And the people on this ranch will know you didn't hand it over without trying. He looked down at the table. He was quiet for so long that she began to wonder if she had overreached, if she had pushed too hard in a direction that wasn't her right to push. Then he looked up. I'm going to need you to stay, he said. She looked at him. Through this, he said. Not as hired help. Not on a monthly arrangement. I need you here because you're the only person who's looked at this operation from the outside and understood it from the inside. And I trust your mind more than anyone I've paid for the same. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not a lawyer, she said. I have a lawyer, he said. I need someone who sees what the lawyer doesn't see. She looked at the papers spread between them. She thought about Tucson. The plan she had carried onto this road like a talisman, a destination to move toward. When staying anywhere felt too much like hoping. She had held on to Tucson the way you held onto a handrail in the dark. Not because you were sure of what was at the bottom of the stairs, but because having something to hold made the descent feel controlled. She didn't need the handrail the same way she had 3 weeks ago. All right, she said. Nathaniel let out a breath that told her he had been holding it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said, pulling the paper back toward her. We still have 3 telegrams to finish, and Hale needs a summary before 6 in the morning. He picked up his pen. They worked. The next morning arrived fast and complicated. Hale came in from Flagstaff before 8 with 2 associates and a leather case full of documentation. Evelyn met with him for an hour before Nathaniel brought Caldwell back to the table, walking him through the legal structure of the pattern of fraud argument and watching Hale's expression shift from professional courtesy to genuine interest. This is good, Hale said, looking at her summary. This is actually very good, if the Harlans will cooperate. Send someone to them today, Evelyn said. Not a letter, a person. Someone who can explain what we're building and why it matters to them specifically. Hale looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel nodded. By the time Caldwell sat down at the table again at 9 in the morning, the room had changed. He felt it immediately. Evelyn could see him feeling it. The slight adjustment in his posture, the recalibration behind his pleasant expression. Hale laid the legal response on the table. We're filing a counterclaim this afternoon, Hale said, challenging the mismanagement characterization on the grounds that it misrepresents documented theft as administrative failure. We're also initiating a formal inquiry into the Continental Land Syndicate's acquisition practices in the Arizona Territory, citing 3 prior cases following identical methodology. Caldwell looked at the document. His expression did not break. He was too practiced for that. But something behind it went very still in the way things go still when a calculation has just come back wrong. This is aggressive, he said. It's accurate, Hale said. Caldwell looked at Nathaniel. You understand this extends your legal exposure significantly. The cost of... Mr. Caldwell, Nathaniel said. His voice was quiet. I've thought about what you said last night, about perception operating independently of intention. You're right that it does. So I want to be clear about what I intend, so there's no confusion about perception. Caldwell waited. "I'm not selling this ranch," Nathaniel said. "Not to your syndicate, not at your price, not at any price, because this land isn't mine alone. To sell it belongs to the people who've built their lives on it, and I don't have the right to take that from them for my own convenience." He paused. "If you want to pursue this legally, we'll meet you in court with everything Miss Carter has documented. If you want to walk away from a case you're going to lose publicly and expensively, that option is also available to you." The room was silent. Caldwell looked at the documents. He looked at Evelyn. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said. 23 days, she said. "And in 23 days, you built this," he said. "The foundation was already here," she said. "I just looked at it honestly." He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up his hat from the table. "I'll need to consult with the syndicate," he said, "before any decision is finalized." "Of course," Hale said pleasantly. Caldwell stood, looked at Nathaniel. Something in his expression beneath the professional composure was grudging and almost genuine. "You have an unusual operation here, Mr. Brooks," he said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I know." Caldwell left. The room exhaled. Pete appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later with a coffee pot, as though he had been waiting just outside with it, which Evelyn strongly suspected he had. Hale gathered his documents. "The Harlan contact is on his way. If they cooperate, and I think they will. The territorial inquiry gives us enough to make the syndicate's legal strategy more expensive than any single ranch purchase justifies. They'll recalculate." "Will they drop it?" Nathaniel said. "Probably," Hale said. "Men like Caldwell are practical. When the math stops working, they move on." He paused. "I'll file this afternoon." He shook Nathaniel's hand and nodded to Evelyn with the specific respect of one professional acknowledging another's work. Then he was gone too, and the room was quiet, and it was just Nathaniel and Evelyn and Pete pouring coffee. Pete handed Evelyn a cup. "You did good," he said in the simple, plain way that Pete said everything. "We did," she said. Pete nodded, went back to the kitchen. Nathaniel looked at Evelyn across the table. He started to say something. She held up a hand. "I know what you want to say," she said. "Do you?" he said. "You want to tell me again that you're glad I was on that road," she said. "Or some version of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Actually," he said, "I was going to say that you told me last night we'd talk about everything else after the work was done." He looked at her steadily. "The work is done." She set down her coffee cup. The house was quiet around them. The good, settled quiet of a place that had just withstood something and was still standing. She looked at Nathaniel Brooks across the table, this man who had found her walking alone on a hard road and offered her water and honest work, and then slowly and without ceremony offered her the rarest thing she had ever been given, the experience of being seen completely and valued for exactly what she was. She was not the girl who had stood on that dusty trail anymore. She was not sure she had been that girl for quite some time. "Then talk," she said. And the expression that crossed his face, then warm and direct, and without any of the careful, practiced distance he had carried for years, was she thought the best thing she had seen in a very long time. He talked, not the way men talked when they were performing honesty, the rehearsed version, the one shaped for effect. He talked the way a person talks when they have carried something alone for long enough that the weight of it has started to change the way they stand. He told her that he had known somewhere in the first week that she was different from anyone he had met in a long time. Not because she was remarkable in ways he could easily list, though she was, but because being around her was the first time in years he had felt like himself without having to work at it. Like the version of him that existed before the money and the name and the weight of managing an empire had settled onto his shoulders was still there, and she had somehow just walked in and sat down with that version without being introduced. He told her he had been afraid of that, afraid of how quickly it had happened and what it meant, and whether it was real or whether he was simply responding to the novelty of someone who treated him like a man and not a holding. He told her he had stopped being afraid of it somewhere on the trail back from Flagstaff. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was the way she had said worry is useful when it makes you prepare. Maybe it was the way she had looked at the fire and talked about her father's philosophy of fixing the wheel. Maybe it was simply the cumulative weight of 23 days of watching a woman move through difficulty with the specific quiet dignity of someone who had decided at some foundational level that she was worth more than the circumstances she had been handed. I didn't know exactly. He just knew. Evelyn listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, the house was still quiet around them, and Pete had long since stopped finding reasons to appear in the doorway. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "I need to tell you something too." "All right," he said. "I've been holding Tucson in my head since the day I arrived here," she said. "Not because I wanted to go there specifically, because having somewhere to go was the only way I knew how to make staying somewhere feel safe. If I always had a door I could walk out of, then nobody had the power to push me through it." He was very still. "I know that's not entirely fair," she said, "to you or to myself, but I want you to understand where I've been so you understand what it means that I'm not thinking about Tucson anymore." He looked at her. "When did you stop?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Somewhere on the trail back," she said. "I'm not sure of the exact moment either." Something in his face shifted the final release of something he had been holding carefully in place. "Evelyn," he said. "I know," she said. "I haven't said it yet," he said. "You were about to," she said. "I was," he agreed. She looked at him directly. This man who had offered her water on a hard road and asked nothing in return, and then without design or strategy, simply shown her who he was, one honest action at a time. "Then say it," she said. "I love you," he said. Plain and direct, the way he said everything that mattered. No embellishment, no build-up. Just the words put down between them like something solid. She breathed. "I know that too," she said quietly. "Is that all I'm getting?" he said. And there was something in his voice she had not heard before. Light, almost careful, like a man who had just taken the biggest risk of his life and was waiting to find out whether the ground would hold. She felt something loosen in her chest. The last of it. The last of the careful distance she had been maintaining since the day she stepped off the wagon and promised herself she would never again let the ground shift under her without warning. "I love you too," she said. "In case that wasn't clear from the part where I stayed." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She looked down at his hand over hers, calloused, steady, the hand of a man who worked his own land and meant every word he said. She turned her hand over and held on. The next weeks moved differently than the ones before, not slower if anything. The pace increased because the legal proceedings against the Continental Land Syndicate required documentation and coordination that kept Evelyn and Hale and Nathaniel in constant motion. But the quality of the time changed. The careful distance was gone. What replaced it was something easier and more honest. The ordinary daily closeness of two people who had stopped pretending they didn't know where this was going. The Harlan family responded to Hale's representative within 48 hours. Margaret Harlan, 61 years old, plain-spoken, and carrying 8 months of legal fury at the syndicate, with the patient-focused anger of a woman who had been waiting for an opportunity to spend it properly, sent back not just agreement to cooperate, but 4 boxes of documentation her own family had preserved from their court proceedings. Letters, transcripts, legal filings. The same language, the same methodology, the same pressure points applied in the same sequence. When Evelyn opened the first box, she sat down and spent an hour going through it, and by the end, she had the full shape of what the syndicate had been doing across the territory for at least 3 years. She brought the summary to Nathaniel that evening. He read it, set it down. "They've done this to 11 properties," he said. "That I can document from what Margaret sent," she said. "There may be more." 11 families, he said. "Some of them are gone now," she said. "Sold and moved on. But some of them are still in the territory, and if they have their own records—" "We reach out to all of them," Nathaniel said immediately. She nodded. "This isn't just about the ranch anymore," she said. "No," he said. "It hasn't been for a while." She looked at him. "Are you all right with that?" she said. "This is going to be bigger than we planned, more expensive, more time. Hale's fees alone. Evelyn, he said with the quiet firmness he used when he had already decided something. "I have more money than I can reasonably spend in my lifetime. If there's one thing worth spending it on, it's making sure what happened to the Harlans doesn't happen to 11 more families." She looked at him for a moment. "Your father would have done the same thing," she said. He was quiet. "I hope so," he said. The territorial inquiry opened 6 weeks after Caldwell's departure from Brooks Ranch. He had not come back. The syndicate's lawyers had filed a formal response to Hale's counterclaim. Careful, professional, and notably less aggressive than their initial position, which told Evelyn they had done their own recalculation and found the numbers had changed. The inquiry was not a trial. It was an investigative proceeding before a territorial judge, a methodical, deliberate man named Hargreaves, who had the reputation of being difficult to impress and impossible to pressure, which was exactly what the situation called for. Evelyn sat in the gallery with Rosa and Margaret Harlan on the first day. She had not expected to be called to testify. Hale had told her it was possible, but not certain. She had prepared, regardless, organized the documentation into a sequence that could be walked through clearly and quickly, anticipated the questions a lawyer defending the syndicate would ask, and rehearsed her answers until they were precise without being rehearsed. Sounding, which was a balance that took longer to achieve than she had expected. On the second day, Hale called her. She walked to the front of the room. She was aware of the specific quality of attention in a courtroom, the way it pressed in from all sides expecting something evaluating before you had said a word. She was also aware of Nathaniel in this gallery, watching her with the calm, steady focus of a man who had complete confidence in what she was about to do. She sat down. The syndicate's lawyer, a man named Prescott Sharp, and efficient, looked at her with the same quick assessment Caldwell had used. She saw him make the same initial error Caldwell had made. She let him. Hale walked her through the documentation first. The notarial records. The pattern across the 11 properties. The consistent legal language in the mismanagement claims. The sequence of pressure approach refusal. Public uncertainty. Buyer pressure. Legal delay, exhaustion. She answered every question in plain, direct language that did not require legal training to follow, because she had understood from the beginning that the most powerful version of the truth was the one that anybody in the room could understand without help. When Hale sat down, Prescott stood. He went after her credentials first. She had expected that. "Miss Carter," he said pleasantly, "you have no formal legal training." "That's correct," she said. "No formal accounting certification." "Also correct." "You were employed by Mr. Brooks for approximately how long before you compiled this documentation?" 23 days when I found the first discrepancy," she said. "Approximately 6 weeks total at the time the inquiry opened." 6 weeks, he repeated, giving the number a weight it didn't deserve. "And before that you were employed where?" "A dry goods store in Red Rock," she said. "Before that, I assisted my father with his accounts." "Your father was an accountant." "My father drove supply wagons," she said. "He taught me to track numbers because he believed a person who couldn't follow what they owed and what they were owed would end up on the wrong side of both." A small sound from the gallery. Not laughter, something warmer. Recognition. Prescott moved on quickly. "The documentation you've compiled, isn't it possible that the similarities across different property cases simply reflect standard legal methodology? That two lawyers using the same legal framework might produce documents with similar language without any coordinated scheme?" "It's possible," she said. Prescott looked slightly surprised that she agreed. "However," she said, "the language similarities are not the primary evidence. The primary evidence is the sequential methodology approach, refusal public mischaracterization of financial records, coordinated pressure on business relationships, legal delay through mismanagement claims. That sequence applied in the same order in the same time frame by representatives of the same organization across 11 separate properties in 3 years is not a coincidence of legal style. It's a system." Prescott looked at her. "A system," he said. "Yes," she said. "One designed to make the cost of fighting higher than the cost of selling. It doesn't need to win in court. It needs to make people too tired and too frightened to stay in court." That's why 3 of the 11 families sold before any legal proceeding concluded. Not because they lost, because the system worked exactly as it was designed to. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Hargreaves was looking at her with the attention of a man who had stopped taking notes because he was listening too carefully. Prescott tried 2 more angles. She answered both precisely and without heat, because heat would have made her seem defensive, and she had nothing to defend. When he finally sat down, there was a particular quality to the silence, the kind that follows when something has been said that people need a moment to absorb. Hale caught her eye briefly as she returned to her seat. The expression on his face said everything she needed to know. She sat down next to Rosa. Rosa squeezed her hand once firmly and said nothing. Judge Hargreaves delivered his findings 12 days later. The Continental Land Syndicate's mismanagement claim against NB Holdings was dismissed in its entirety. The judge's written findings described the claim as lacking evidentiary foundation and inconsistent with documented facts regarding the source and nature of the financial discrepancy in question. That was the expected part. The unexpected part. The part that made Hale read the findings twice and then call Nathaniel immediately was the second section. Hargreaves had referred the syndicate's pattern of acquisition practices to the federal territorial prosecutor for further investigation. He cited the 11 documented cases. He cited the sequential methodology. He cited specifically the testimony of a witness who had demonstrated with documentary evidence that the pattern constituted a deliberate scheme rather than independent legal actions. He did not name Evelyn in the findings. But in the gallery that day, when Hale read that section aloud, Margaret Harlan turned to Evelyn and said, "That's you, girl. That's what you did." Evelyn looked at the wall ahead of her. She thought about the flat rock on the side of the Tucson road where she had sat and counted $3.40 and told herself she was not going to cry. She thought about how far that rock was from this room. "That's all of us," she said. "That's what we did together." Margaret made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, but conveyed that she was willing to accept the diplomatic version without fully endorsing it. That evening, Brooks Ranch held a supper that Pete had been quietly planning for 3 days in the specific certain manner of a man who had decided the outcome before the judge announced it and had simply been preparing accordingly. Every hand on the ranch was there. Hector and Rosa, their children. Margaret Harlan, who had come up from Prescott and showed no inclination to leave quickly. Hale, who stayed an extra day and was persuaded without much effort to stay for supper. 2 of the other families from the documented cases who had made the trip when they heard what was happening and had spent the inquiry days in the gallery watching. The food was considerable. The noise was the specific, uncomplicated noise of people who had been through something difficult together and had come out the right side of it. Evelyn sat at the long table between Rosa and Margaret and ate Pete's cooking and listened to the voices around her and felt something she recognized, though she had not felt it in a long time. Belonging. Not the provisional kind, the kind you earned by being useful enough, by staying quiet enough, by not costing too much. The unconditional kind. The kind that said you are here because you are part of this, and that is not a thing we are reviewing. She had not known how much she had missed it until she felt it again. After supper, when the table had been cleared and the children were playing in the yard and the adults had spread out into the easy groupings of people with nowhere they needed to be, Nathaniel appeared at her elbow. "Walk with me," he said quietly. She went. They walked out past the barn, away from the noise and the lamplight, to where the land opened up wide and the sky was enormous above them, thick with stars. The way the Arizona sky got on clear summer nights. Not romantic in the way stories described, just genuinely vast. The kind of vast that put everything in proper proportion. They walked in silence for a while, the way they had always been comfortable doing. Then Nathaniel stopped. She stopped beside him. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. "I've been thinking about how to say this for 2 weeks," he said. "Which is unusual for me. I'm not generally someone who has trouble saying things." "I know," she said. "You're the most direct person I've met." "Not about this," he said. "About this I've been completely useless." She waited. He turned to face her. "When I found you on that road," he said, "I offered you water and a ride because it was the right thing to do. I told myself that's all it was." He paused. "I knew inside a week that I was wrong about that." She held his gaze. "Evelyn," he said, "I'm not asking you to stay because I need someone who can read the accounts. I'm not asking you because you helped save the ranch. I'm asking you because this place, this life doesn't feel like mine the same way it did before you were in it, and I don't want to go back to the way it felt before." The night was quiet around them. "I want to marry you," he said, "if you'll have me. Not the empire, not the name me. The man who fixes fences and eats in Pete's kitchen and rode out on a Tuesday and found the most remarkable person I've ever met, standing on an empty road with $3 in her pocket and more dignity than anyone I've known." She stood very still. She thought about 19 years old and a torn cloth bag and a half-empty canteen. She thought about a question she had asked herself on that road. Was I really that easy to leave behind? She understood now that the question had never been about her worth. It had been about the poverty of imagination in the people who left. People who could see a woman like Evelyn Carter and decide she was easy to leave behind were people who had never looked at her closely enough to understand what they were turning away from. Nathaniel Brooks had looked at her. From the first moment on the road, with the specific, unhurried attention of a man who had learned to assess things honestly, and he had not looked away since. She breathed. "Yes," she said. He was very still for a moment. "Yes," she said again more clearly, because she wanted it to be unmistakable. "I'll marry you. Not the land, not the name you. The man who offered water to a stranger and didn't ask what she was running from. The man who lit 2 fires every night on the trail and ate half my plate of Pete's biscuits without apologizing." She looked at him. "That man. Yes." He reached out and took her face in both hands, the calloused, honest hands of a working man, and looked at her the way she had seen him look at the land he loved, with the specific, settled certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was holding and intended to hold it for the rest of his life. He kissed her. She held on to him, behind them from the direction of the house. Pete's voice rose above the general noise with the announcement that there was still pie left and it wasn't going to eat itself, which broke the solemnity of the moment so effectively and so perfectly that Evelyn laughed against Nathaniel's shoulder, the unguarded, genuine kind of laugh she had almost forgotten she was capable of. He laughed too. They were married 6 weeks later in the yard of Brooks Ranch on a Saturday morning with every hand present, and Rosa standing beside Evelyn and Hector standing beside Nathaniel and Pete, having spent 3 days on the food, with the focused dedication of a man who had decided this was his masterwork and was not going to be rushed. Margaret Harlan came. She wore her best dress and sat in the front row and cried without any apparent embarrassment about it, then told Evelyn afterward that she hadn't cried at a wedding in 20 years and considered this a significant data point. Evelyn wore a dress that Rosa had helped her make simple, well-fitted, nothing extravagant. She had not wanted extravagance. She had wanted something that felt like hers. When she walked across the yard toward Nathaniel, she did not look at the crowd, or the sky, or the land, spreading wide on all sides of them. She looked at him. He was watching her the way he always watched her, directly, with the full weight of his attention, without performance. She reached him. "You look like yourself," he said quietly. "I feel like myself," she said. The ceremony was simple. The minister spoke. They answered. And when it was done, the yard erupted with the uncomplicated celebration of people who had earned something together and knew it. In the months that followed, the federal investigation into the Continental Land Syndicate moved forward with the documentation that Evelyn had compiled. 3 of the families who had been pressured into selling were able to pursue civil claims for damages. The syndicate's territorial operations were suspended pending the outcome of the federal proceedings. Caldwell sent no further representatives to Brooks Ranch. Evelyn took on the formal management of the ranch accounts, not because Nathaniel asked her to, but because she asked him if she could, and because it was the work she was good at, and it was work that mattered. She also began corresponding with Margaret Harlan and 2 of the other affected families, sharing the documentation methodology she had developed in a form that other people could use. Margaret wrote back after the first letter. You understand that you've started something, don't you? People in this territory are going to come to you with their problems. I hope you're prepared for that. Evelyn read the letter at the desk in the ranch office, the same desk where she had first organized the supply records, 23 days into a stay she had told herself was temporary. She wrote back, "I've been preparing my whole life. I just didn't know what for." She sealed the letter. She looked out the office window at the yard where Nathaniel was working alongside Hector on the east fence. His hat pushed back, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, moving with the unhurried, focused competence of a man entirely at home in his own life. He looked up as though he felt her looking. She raised a hand. He raised one back. She turned back to the desk. There was work to do. There was always work to do, and she had learned to love that about this life. The way it kept moving forward. The way it asked something real from you every day, and gave something real back. She picked up her pen. She thought about the girl who had stood on a dusty trail in July with $3.40 and a question she didn't yet know how to answer. She thought about everything that question had led to, once she stopped letting it break her and started letting it drive her. She thought about her father, his careful handwriting in the front of the Bible, his philosophy about the wheel, the way he had stopped on a cold November road to help a stranger without thinking twice. "I found it, Papa," she thought. "I found where the road was going." She was not the girl who had been left behind. She was the woman who had walked forward anyway, through the heat and the uncertainty and the weight of everything she didn't yet know, until she found the place and the person and the life that had been waiting for someone brave enough to reach them. And the road that had once broken her heart had brought her without apology and without detour exactly where she was always meant to be.